The city hospital ER was choked with night chaos, a constant screaming storm of noise. Nurse Erin Hayes moved silently, a ghost routinely dismissed. Senior doctor snapped, "Move it! You're in the way!" ignoring her efficiency. Colleagues whispered she was too timid for real trauma. When a critical patient arrived, the head physician shouted, "Hayes, get out of the way!" She stepped back silently, but then military engines roared surrounding the entrance. A booming voice on a loudspeaker demanded, "Where is she? We need her. Now, ma'am, please step outside." Her name was Erin Hayes, 31 years old, defined by her low ponytail, steady gaze, and minimal speech. She was the definition of unremarkable, a ghost in the relentless machine of the city hospital's emergency department. She wore standard, slightly too large navy scrubs and walked with an economy of motion, no wasted steps, no sudden movements, a habit that screamed discipline but was universally mistaken for timidity. In the sprawling, high-stress world of the hospital, Erin willingly took the quiet, undesirable jobs. Her duties were often relegated to the logistical foundation of care, cleaning and sterilizing delicate instruments, organizing the dizzying complexity of the medication distribution system, arranging patient comfort, pillows, blankets, and continuously monitoring the low-acuity holding bay. She was the department's invisible anchor. Despite her documented precision and the speed with which she executed her tasks, never making an error, never scrambling for supplies, she was consistently dismissed by the senior medical staff. "Get me a nurse with more experience," the attending physician, Dr. Markham, would wave her away, often without meeting her eyes. "You handle the paperwork, Hayes." The implication was clear. She was fit for clerical duties, not the critical, high-stakes decisions of trauma care. Her organizational system, honed in Combat Field Surgery Units, CFMU, was a work of unsettling genius. She didn't stock, she inventoried. She didn't clean, she sterilized to a standard far beyond hospital requirements. She viewed every bandage, every suture, every life-saving drug not as an item, but as a guaranteed resource. This intense dedication, however, was frequently ridiculed. Dr. Jensen, a smug, recently certified resident, once leaned over her cart and smirked. "Hayes, are you organizing the crash cart by color-coding the expiration dates? It's the ER, not a library. You need to relax and develop some grit, not just organizational compulsive disorder." Erin merely tightened her grip on the steering handle and moved away. She knew that her compulsion had saved lives when the lights went out and the chaos was total. Other nurses sometimes whispered about her, "She's too nice, too quiet. She freezes up when things get loud. She must never have handled a truly difficult, high-pressure case." They viewed her composure not as control, but as a nervous collapse of personality. Erin never reacted to the dismissiveness. She simply lowered her head, the slight tension in her jaw the only visible sign of the internal cost, and resumed her work, finding a strange, familiar solace in being overlooked. She wore her perceived meekness like armor, knowing that anonymity was a protective layer she could not afford to lose. Many younger doctors, particularly those fresh from residency, thought she was easily intimidated and lacked real-world grit. "I'll take that," they'd say condescendingly, snatching a challenging IV insertion or a wound irrigation procedure from her hands. She would step back instantly, offering no argument, preferring the immediate sting of insult over the prolonged danger of exposure. The one time her true expertise almost slipped through was during a chaotic motor vehicle accident involving a complex open fracture. While the primary surgeon was yelling for an assessment, Erin's hands moved independently. She instinctively handed the surgeon the exact, specialized traction splint needed, precisely set to the correct counter tension, seconds before he even had time to request it or calculate the setting. The surgeon just paused, gave her a dismissive, sharp side eye, and accepted the tool. "Don't try to anticipate, nurse. Wait for the explicit order. You're not the one cutting." An older, wiser orderly named Henry, who had seen decades of hospital politics, often observed Erin with a thoughtful frown. He once muttered to a cleaner, "That girl, She knows things, more than they give her credit for, but no one is patient enough to listen to silence. Erin preferred and actively sought out the graveyard shift, the K&A night everyone else dreaded and avoided. This late hour allowed her maximum solitude and minimal scrutiny. She meticulously maintained a ritual of preparedness, always arriving 30 minutes early to conduct a private inspection. She checked every detail, ensuring suction machines had clear lines, emergency oxygen tanks were topped off, monitor leads were organized, and critical flow valves were secured. It was not mere organization. It was a military-level readiness drill applied to civilian life. Paradoxically, her greatest therapeutic gift was her quiet voice. When dealing with agitated elderly or severely panicked patients, Erin's tone was soft as the wind, speaking words of gentle, unwavering reassurance that could often stabilize them without the need for physical restraints or heavy chemical sedation. She was a master of nonviolent control, yet none of this quiet, life-saving competence was ever formally acknowledged or praised. It was just considered lucky or coincidence. The risk of exposure always warred with the imperative to save a life. She had carefully constructed her life to minimize this conflict. Yet in the high-stakes environment of the ER, her code of service inevitably demanded intervention. She knew that revealing even a fraction of her true training would shatter her peace. But standing by while a preventable death occurred was a betrayal of everything she had endured to survive. That betrayal was a far greater fear than any reprimand or scrutiny. Even when, in a terrifying blur, she discreetly leaned over a panicked junior doctor and silently adjusted the placement of an airway tube, correcting a critical procedural error that prevented the patient from coding, the best she received was a mumbled, thanks, Hayes. Next time, give me a heads up before you intervene." On this specific late night, the hospital environment was exceptionally chaotic, a genuine crisis unfolding with staff shortages and overwhelming patient volume. Everyone was frayed and stressed. Erin continued her silent, efficient circuit of the department, her face an unreadable mask, unaware that in just a few short, violent minutes, the carefully constructed walls of her life were about to fall, and the entire hospital would finally understand the terrifying truth of the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. The stillness of the chaotic room shattered when the trauma bay doors burst open. The new patient was a severely injured male, approximately 40 years old, rushed in on a gurney. His military fatigues were ripped and soaked, not just with blood, but stained with fine, pale desert dust. The head physician, Dr. Markham, roared for immediate action. "Massive internal trauma, possible pneumothorax. We need a chest tube now. Which nurse knows how to prep the drain kit?" All the nurses, save for Erin, avoided eye contact, their hands suddenly busy. The procedure was high risk and rarely performed outside surgery. Erin stepped forward a fraction of a step, intending to offer her assistance, her mind already calculating the proper insertion point and trajectory. But Dr. Markham spotted her and immediately dismissed her with a sharp hand gesture. "Not you, Hayes. We need someone seasoned. Go get the crash cart and be fast." Chihuahua. As the inexperienced junior doctor fumbled, frantically searching the shelves for the correct instrument, Erin silently moved. With a graceful economy of movement, she retrieved the exact size of needle decompression kit and placed it precisely on the instrument tray, oriented correctly for immediate use. Dr. Markham finally found the tray and looked down, startled. "Who prepared this? Who set this up? It's perfect," he demanded, bewildered. No one answered. Erin had already dissolved back into the periphery, watching the patient with an unsettling, clinical focus. The injured soldier, his chest rising and falling raggedly, slowly opened his eyes, which were clouded with shock and pain. His gaze swept the frantic room, finally locking onto Erin. His body stiffened, and a gasp of recognition, bordering on disbelief, escaped his lips. With a surge of desperate strength, he reached out and grabbed Erin's wrist, his grip surprisingly firm. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper. Ma'am, by God, is that Commander Hayes?" For Erin, the moment was an internal cataclysm. The shock of being named, of having her two separate lives violently collide, short-circuited her focus. He shouldn't know my name. No one should. The name Hayes was scrubbed from the official military reports concerning her supposed death. The only way he knew it was if he had been there, been close enough to witness the command structure before the disaster. The soldier, seeing the stark panic flash across her eyes, knew his memory was right. He pressed his advantage, his voice gaining desperate clarity, powered by adrenaline and certainty. I remember the radio chatter. The day the sniper took out our point man, you ran 300 meters across open street under heavy fire just to patch him up with a field suture kit and a prayer. They called you the Wraith for how you disappeared and reappeared in the smoke. I saw your face then, ma'am. That focus, it's unmistakable. Erin instantly went white, the color draining from her face as if a faucet had been turned off. She tore her hand free, recoiling physically from the forbidden name. The surrounding nurses glanced at each other, confusion turning to open curiosity. Commander, her? What is he talking about? The soldier, now fighting to stay conscious, pressed on, the memory clearly overriding his pain. He choked out the damning details. I saw you at FOB Falcon, near Fallujah. You were the lead officer commanding the special trauma surgical unit. Everyone said you died in the cave-in. Dr. Markham scoffed, adjusting his glasses. The patient is delirious. Commander, this is Nurse Hayes. She's been working here for years. She's not even... The soldier interrupted him with a raw, desperate cry of conviction. She saved my unit from the IED blast in 2016. She evacuated the wounded under fire. She's the one. The sheer force of the soldier's conviction hit the room like a physical blow. The silence was immediate and absolute, punctuated only by the patient's shallow, ragged breathing. Dr. Markham looked at Erin, then at the soldier, then back at Erin. The confident sneer was replaced by a look of bewildered terror. He wasn't seeing a timid nurse. He was seeing an officer under fire. The way she had cut off the conversation, the undeniable authority, the cold calculation in her eyes when discussing the patient's viability, it all suddenly clicked into a terrifying, unfamiliar context. A medic, a commander, a ghost. He had confused profound discipline with fear, silent suffering with lack of character. The shame was a bitter, choking taste in his mouth. But before he could muster a response, the medical emergency escalated, demanding his attention. Erin cut him off, her voice suddenly low, sharp, and terrifyingly cold. Focus on stabilizing the patient, she commanded. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a military order. Though her voice was quiet, it carried an immense, undeniable authority that silenced the entire trauma bay instantly. Everyone froze, intimidated by the sheer, unbridled force in her tone. A moment later, the patient's airway compromised catastrophically. The junior doctor handling the intubation tube began to tremble, his hands seizing up under the extreme pressure. Erin stepped forward. Her hand clamped down on the doctor's, gently but with ultimate finality. Let me, she stated, the urgency absolute. This time, Dr. Markham was too stunned, too caught off guard by the voice and the sheer confidence in her posture to object. In a stunning, fluid display of skill, she navigated the complex procedure. In precisely 12 seconds, the kind of speed only honed under the immediate threat of enemy fire, she had established a perfect emergency airway, a technique utilizing a specialized combat field maneuver rarely seen in civilian hospitals. A seasoned emergency department nurse, witnessing the impossible speed, exhaled a shaky breath. Where did you learn that technique? That's not in any civilian manual. Erin didn't bother to reply. She simply stepped back, returning to the shadows, murmuring only, "It is irrelevant." The definitive sign of her true identity came at the close of the act. As Erin moved the gurney into the adjacent bay, her sleeve slipped down slightly, revealing a faded rectangular tan patch stitched onto her inner scrub. The text was mostly obscured, but two lines were clearly visible. U.S. Navy, CFMU Special Ops Medic. The truth was out. The critically injured soldier was rushed into the operating theater, followed by the surgical team. But the news was already an unstoppable, supersonic shockwave. The quiet, dismissed nurse was the legendary medic, Commander Hayes, who had been officially declared killed in action in Fallujah 8 years prior. A senior registered nurse gasped, clutching her clipboard. She's the ghost story, the one the foreign news reports wrote about, the medic who walked out of the rubble after the building imploded. Dr. Markham, the head physician who had so casually scorned her, heard the rumors and immediately sought her out, his face pale with a mix of fear and professional terror. He found Erin in a small utility corridor, quietly cleaning the very instruments she had just used with surgical precision. He spoke, his voice hoarse, the respect already creeping in. "Is it true, Hayes? Did you serve in Naval Special Warfare Medical?" Erin paused her work, her eyes fixed on the gleaming metal tool in her hand. "That, doctor," she said softly, "belongs to a lifetime ago." Suddenly, the very ground beneath the hospital began to shake, a deep, rhythmic vibration like a minor earthquake. The glass panes of the trauma bay windows rattled violently. In the next moment, the entire hospital was engulfed by the deafening roar of extremely large engines, powerful and unmistakable. Nurses shrieked in confusion and fear. "Oh, God, are those military vehicles?" Just then, a fleet of 12 heavily armored Humvees, 2 massive MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, and a hovering, low-flying Black Hawk utility helicopter simultaneously established a perimeter around the hospital's main entrance. The sound was overwhelming. The downdraft from the Black Hawk whipped debris across the parking lot, and the deep percussive thump-thump of its rotor blades physically vibrated the concrete foundation of the building. Hospital security personnel rushed the doors, bewildered and frantic. "What in the world is happening?" A high-ranking naval colonel, an imposing figure of authority, stepped out of the leading MRAP, flanked by an armed and extremely serious escort team. He roared, his voice amplified by a portable loudspeaker, the sound cutting through the engine noise in the hospital's interior. "Where is she? We need Commander Hayes immediately." Every single head in the building, staff, patients, visitors, simultaneously turned toward Erin, who stood frozen in the utility hall. Dr. Markham was stunned into immobility. "Commander, you are the commander?" he finally whispered. Erin sighed, the sound heavy with resignation, and tugged her sleeve down instinctively to conceal the faded patch. "It was the past," she repeated, weaker this time. "I just wanted to be a civilian nurse." The colonel, his urgency absolute, strode purposefully into the hallway, ignoring the frightened civilian staff. He stopped directly in front of Erin, snapping to a perfect, formal salute. The colonel held the salute for a full, agonizing 10 seconds. An eternity in the chaotic hospital, forcing everyone to witness the respect due to her. "The situation is complex, ma'am. The target team is SEAL Team 6, pinned down in a non-permissive environment. They have 3 Category A casualties, trauma level requiring immediate intervention that cannot wait for a full extraction. We have medical personnel on standby, but no one possesses your unique combination of deep field surgical certification, rapid environmental triage protocols, and the critical command authority to override standard procedure when lives are on the line. The extraction window is closing. Only Commander Hayes has the institutional trust and the demonstrable skill set to coordinate this operation remotely, utilizing assets currently in the air. We are not asking you to fight, ma'am. We are asking you to command the life-saving assets." The entire hospital staff, from the janitor to the chief of surgery, stood rigid, watching the slow, unbelievable reveal. The fact that the military wasn't asking for a doctor, but her, a supposed ghost, was the ultimate validation of the life she had tried to erase. The colonel finally dropped his hand, the gravity of his expression unwavering. "Your nation needs the legend, ma'am. Your nation needs Hunter Medic 1. The same physician who had just yelled at her minutes before whispered in horrified realization, I was wrong about you. Terribly wrong." The young nurse who had called her timid began to openly weep, shaking her head. "You're a real-life hero." Erin looked at the faces around her, her eyes glistening red with the pain of her forced exposure. "I only ever wanted to be a normal nurse," she stated, her voice thick with emotion. The colonel lowered his salute but maintained his intense, respectful gaze. "No, ma'am. Today the nation needs you to be who you are." The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the sharp metallic tang of the military machines outside. The sound of the Black Hawk's rotary blades created a deafening, terrifying rhythm, pounding the truth home. The shame on the faces of her colleagues was unbearable. The young resident, Dr. Jensen, who had mocked her for her compulsion, now staggered backward and slumped against the wall, silently weeping into his hands, completely overwhelmed by the scale of his own error. He had belittled a national asset. The veteran nurse who had called her timid walked over to Erin and, without a word, reached out and gently squeezed her arm, a gesture of profound, wordless apology and awe. With profound finality, Erin removed her latex gloves. She handed her scrub cap to the shocked orderly. She walked toward the entrance, toward the roaring Black Hawk, where dozens of armed servicemen and women stood in rigid formation, waiting for their commander. As she passed Dr. Markham, she paused. "Clean that needle kit properly, doctor. Seconds matter." It was a whisper, but it sounded like a thunderclap. The commander had returned. "Believe that true humility is the greatest strength?" Comment, respect. After Erin stepped through the hospital doors and into the waiting convoy, the hospital plunged into an absolute disbelieving silence that lasted several long minutes. The thunder of the departing military vehicles left a void deeper than any silence they had ever experienced. No one moved. No one spoke. The routine life and death chaos of the emergency department had been utterly eclipsed by the reality they had just witnessed. Finally, an experienced nurse broke the silence, her voice trembling with self-reproach. "We treated a legend like a piece of furniture. We ignored the woman who rescued an entire platoon." Another nurse nodded, tears welling up. "And she never complained. Not once. She just took it." Dr. Markham leaned his hands heavily on the sterile wall, the shame radiating off him. "I yelled at the person the SEAL team calls commander. I dismissed the most decorated medic I will ever encounter." Dr. Markham, incapable of standing upright, slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, covering his face with his hands. He whispered, "We were so focused on the rank and the title, we forgot the skill set. We traded a tactical genius for a scapegoat." This single dramatic image, the most powerful doctor in the room crippled by shame, became the catalyst for change. The nurses, no longer burdened by resentment, felt a surge of professional pride that their profession, in the form of Erin, held such a rare and powerful distinction. The news, already explosive, became a tsunami throughout the hospital system and the city's medical network. The headline was undeniable. "The quiet nurse, Shiri, special operations medic who saved 27 troops in Fallujah." The entire department began a silent, immediate reassessment of their own behavior. Physicians began to moderate their sharp language, realizing the casual disrespect they had shown their support staff. The way they spoke to every nurse, every orderly, every EMT instantly changed. In the next emergency case that came through the door, a low-grade abdominal issue, the junior physician, instead of barking orders, paused and cautiously asked the advice of the attending RN. It was a small gesture, but a seismic shift in culture. A paramedic technician, one of the EMTs who had initially called Erin timid, shared his profound realization in the break room. "Erin taught me the hardest lesson of my career. Everyone has a story you don't know, and the quiet ones usually have the loudest." The silence Erin had cultivated for years was now being replaced by a culture of curiosity and humility. Instead of assuming incompetence, staff began asking questions. "Where does this instrument go? How would you secure this line?" The shift wasn't just about respecting Erin. It was about realizing that knowledge and experience existed in every corner of the department, often unseen. That night, the hospital staff, the very people who had belittled her, became united in anxiety, compulsively monitoring the military and news channels, desperate for an update on her mission. Finally, late into the shift, a secure communication came through from the military base to the hospital administration. The message was terse and professional. "Commander Hayes successfully coordinated the operation. 6 personnel extracted and secured. Mission accomplished. A collective, profound sigh of relief swept through the department. They felt a deep, unfamiliar sense of pride, as if one of their own, their true hero, had just returned victorious. They had watched a legend be born, die, and resurrect, all within the walls of their hospital. Believe in kindness and professional respect? Comment, honor. 1 week later, Erin Hayes returned to the hospital. She was wearing her old familiar nurse uniform, navy blue, slightly worn, without a single medal or insignia. She refused the offer of a military escort back to her shift. But this time, when she walked through the staff entrance, the entire department, the chief of surgery, the head of nursing, the junior doctors, and the orderlies all stood up in a spontaneous, silent show of respect. "Welcome back, ma'am," the chief of surgery stated simply. Erin blushed, the familiar red rising in her cheeks. "Please," she said, her hands gently gripping the straps of her backpack. "I am just a nurse." The chief of nursing stepped forward, his eyes full of warmth and absolute respect. "No one here is just anything, Erin. You have saved more lives and in worse circumstances than all of us combined." Erin immediately returned to her mundane tasks, accepting her usual light duties, but the atmosphere was fundamentally altered. Her colleagues looked at her with an entirely new gaze, one of genuine professional admirations and personal deference. Her silence was no longer misinterpreted. It was understood as the deep wellspring of her discipline. As she began her routine, she noticed a small, neatly wrapped parcel on her medication cart. It was a brand new high-end trauma shear set, engraved simply with the word MIAM and the hospital's logo. It was a quiet, practical gift that spoke volumes. It meant, "We see you now. We accept both parts of you." This small gesture meant more to her than any military medal. "Thank you for not quitting on us, Erin," a veteran nurse admitted, holding her hand. "We need you here." Erin smiled gently, a real, unguarded smile this time. "I need all of you too." That evening, she took a moment of solitude on the hospital's rooftop balcony, looking out over the city. In the distance, she could just make out the distinctive profile of a Black Hawk helicopter flying back toward the military base. Her face was softer, the heavy burden of her past finally lifted, the anonymity she had lost replaced by genuine acceptance. A young doctor, the one whose life she had saved from his own error, approached her cautiously. "Commander Hayes," he began, reverence in his voice. Erin gently interrupted him. "Just call me Erin." He nodded, respecting the request instantly. "Understood. But to me, you will always be the hero who showed us what real quiet strength looks like." His recognition, unforced and genuine, was the final piece of her piece. She realized she hadn't run away from the war. She had simply chosen a new battlefield, one where the casualties still mattered. But the fanfare and the politics were stripped away. She was saving lives, one shift at a time, hidden in plain sight, but no longer in shame. Erin finally gave a full, free smile, for the first time completely unburdened and at peace with her identity. The following morning, she put on her scrubs and reported for the night shift, ready for the simple, urgent realities of saving a life. She had traded a legendary past for a purposeful present. If you believe courage still lives in everyday heroes, subscribe to the Veteran Story. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.